Welcome to AI for Good, the leading action-oriented global and inclusive United Nations platform on AI. Organized by ITU in partnership with 40 UN sister organizations and co-convened with Switzerland. The goal of AI for Good is to identify practical applications of AI to advance the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and scale those solutions for global impact. In today's session, we're counting on you to use the live video wall feature to ask questions and post comments to help create an engaging discussion. We encourage you to stay until the end, as we will hold a 30-minute networking session in the neural network. Here you can meet, ask questions to our distinguished speakers, connect, and chat with the AI for Good community. It is now time to kick off the session and welcome our first speaker. The floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar in the AI for Good webinar series. My name is Matthias Greschel, and my primary placement is in the ITU WTO focus group on AI for Health, where we develop standards for the safe and reproducible use of AI in healthcare. If you have any questions on AI for Good or the focus group AI for Health, please reach out anytime. We're always happy to answer questions and welcome you on board. I have the privilege of introducing today's AI in Health webinar by Andrew Welchman. How could we improve mental health for 100 million people within 5 years? And I really love the title. And I'm really curious now to hear what Andrew's gonna talk to us about. Andrew is Executive Vice President for Impact at IESO, where his primary mission is to forge strategic alliances with like-minded organizations and partners to collaborate on research in mental health care. Prior to joining IESO in 2021, Andrew was head of neuroscience and mental health at the Wellcome Trust, which is the major funding agency in the UK. And he was leading strategic initiatives over 500 million pounds in brain science and neurosciences. He was before that professor of neural intelligence at the University of Cambridge, where his research was focused on sort of combining human brain imaging and data-driven algorithms and AI to uncover how we perceive, act, and understand the world around us. So Andrew is an amazing speaker who can really talk to us from various perspectives, from the funder's perspective, the academic and researcher's perspective, and now from IESO, where he's now currently affiliated. So, dear audience, you're going to be in the neural network now, so please submit your questions, be concise and brief, and I'll take them to Andrew. We'll have a 15 minutes of discussion. And with no further ado, Andy, welcome. I hope you're doing well.
Thanks so much, Matthias. Really, really excited to be here. What a wonderful combination of thinking about how we make the world a better place using smart new technology. So I'm really excited to tell you a little bit about what IESO does and how we work. And I'm hoping that I can do that in a way that really brings out some of these kind of really big issues that the title of my talk, I hope that's up there now, but is really designed as a kind of provocation to make us think about a really big problem, mental health, and the fact that we know that we're seeing an increasing burden of mental health conditions across the world, and we've been too slow to deal with it. So what can we do? How can we leverage technology to help address this challenge? And I'm not going to provide a magic answer to this question today, but I hope that together we can explore some of those issues and think about what we could do in the future to make mental health better. And I'm just going to start with some numbers. These are sort of really big, stark numbers in terms of the number of people across the world that are affected by these conditions. I've used quite a conservative estimate of 1 in 6 people here. Other people go as far as 1 in 4 people. And the data I have here are for adults. We certainly know that young people, particularly through the pandemic, have really suffered, and that the burden of mental health conditions has grown ever bigger. It's a huge cost to our economies, to individual lives, and we know that we have way more demand for help than we're able to meet. We're fortunate here in the UK to have one of the world's best therapy services called IAPT from the National Health Service here. But even so, that's still leaving 80% of the demand that's out there unmet. And the chance of success is still really a coin toss. So it's, in a way, it's just not good enough. And as much as I like these numbers as indicating the scale of the problem, the reality, of course, is that we are talking about individual people. We're talking about our families, our friends, our colleagues, whose lives are being blighted by poor mental health. And when I look around, I see some really desperate situations, and we need to make that better. So that's kind of the big challenge. Why is it a hard challenge? So I'm just going to start by walking through some of the ways in which I think about mental health and why I think we haven't had the advances that we've really needed over the past 50 years or so. So let's just start by thinking about what is mental health, what is mental distress, and how do we capture it? One of the challenges that we have is if I have some kind of physical disease, I can go into a doctor, they can take a sample from me, and then they can run some tests in a lab independent of me and work out what the condition is that I might be suffering from. When we're talking about mental health conditions, we are dependent on the inexact language of humans to describe their own emotional states and what they've been experiencing. And I've just got a vignette here really of different ways of expressing things about our current emotions. And it should be clear, I think, that it's very difficult to draw any kind of hard line between somebody who's just experiencing the normal rigors of life all the way through to very severe presentations of mental illness. So people use this language, and we have a very poor way of using that language to help really understand what's going on for a particular individual, and therefore what is best able to help them through that. Another problem is that when we think about the symptoms of mental health conditions, actually there are very few unique symptoms for a particular condition. So there's this kind of many-to-many mapping between the labels that we give to particular mental health conditions and the range of symptoms that people can describe. Again, that makes it harder for us to have a very clear route forward in terms of providing an intervention, because we haven't got a good understanding of what people are suffering from. And in consequence of that, when we describe a particular condition, let's say depression, we know that there are many different people suffering from quite different things, all of whom sit underneath that label. I was really intrigued to come across a paper recently by Daniel Barron, where he worked out that there are about 500,000 ways of being diagnosed with major depressive disorder within the standard manual for mental health diagnoses. So 500,000 combinations of individual symptoms that can lead you to that diagnosis. So we really don't have a good handle on these conditions. Another reason that the challenge is really big and really hard is that we know that demand for interventions, demand for help, far surpasses the supply that we have. So I've got some figures here that are based on some calculations from the UK population. I have to say before I start this that the UK is actually quite well served in terms of providing mental health professionals. But if we look across the UK, we find that we have about one mental health professional for every 600 people in need. If I compare that to the number of teachers in the UK, so about 600,000 teachers for about 10 million pupils, that's one teacher for every 17 kids. So we have a big mismatch in terms of the demand that's there and the capacity we have with which to meet that demand. Another big issue is that the quality of care, if you're lucky enough to get care, the quality of that can be quite variable. So often the choice of treatment is quite random. There often isn't a rational basis for a particular choice of treatment. There are many delays in the care system. And actually, often people in health systems are incented to provide a service rather than actually to do what the person suffering wants, which is to get them better. So we have some perverse incentives within these systems and no incentives for preventative actions. I said the UK was relatively well provisioned. If we look across the globe, these are some calculations that we've done that try to work out how much support there is within total mental health services across different locations in the world. So up there in the UK, we're doing okay. But if we look in sub-Saharan, if we look in the Indian subcontinent, if we look within China, and it's certainly if we look within the continent of Africa, where actually the data were so sparse we couldn't calculate a reliable number, we know that even in a well-served economy like the UK's, we have a problem with meeting demand. When we go to other locations around the world, that's an even bigger problem. So how have we ended up in this kind of somewhat sorry state of affairs? If we think about the journey over the past 20 years or so, I think about this as a journey in 3 acts. So at least within the UK, we have had a discussion in Act 1 about the stigma of mental health conditions. So we knew that individuals were being stereotyped because of the conditions that they were suffering from. So that affected individuals, but also there was discrimination of investment, insufficient investment in the provision of services and in advancing research in this area. That's come about because we've had a poor understanding of the conditions and treatments. As I alluded to at the beginning, mental health conditions rarely have a physical biomarker, a piece of evidence that we can point to and say, that's what you're suffering from. And because we haven't had that firm evidence base, that's led to quite a lot of non-evidenced thinking. The second stage in that has been to think about the problem of access. So there are still currently long waiting lists for intervention and a lack of proactive thinking. So we're prepared to intervene when a crisis becomes so severe that we can't ignore it, but we are less prepared to invest in investing earlier to try and prevent something before it turns into a crisis. So we have low global investment, a lack of capacity, often care pathways are weak, and we have a siloed approach that's separated physical from mental health, where, of course, anytime you experience a physical health condition, that will have mental health consequences, and boosting mental health is often a way of improving physical health. And the sort of third part of this journey has been to think about quality. I think we still need to do this. So at least sitting in the UK, we're somewhere in combination between Act 2 and Act 3 in our thinking about mental health. But the quality of treatments just hasn't been there. We've had quite fixed views about the right way to intervene. There's been very little quality control, and we've rewarded activity rather than results. Depending on where you sit on the planet, your location may be on different points in this journey, but we still have major things to do across all of these bins. And I suppose the problems that exercise me particularly are thinking about how we improve access and how we make sure that that access is to high quality care. It's often said that there's a mental health crisis, and that word is used a lot in modern societies. And often I find that's not a helpful description, in that it tends to make things overly emotive and actually isn't a call for action. I like to think about crisis in its sort of medical, derivation, where we think about a crisis being the turning point of a disease, where an important change takes place. And that change will either indicate that somebody is going to recover, or they will irreversibly decline. So for me, we do have a mental health crisis, and that's a decision point, and we need to be the people that start making that decision in order to make it better. So how can we do that? I'm going to tell you a little bit about the way in which IESO has tried to do that, really to illustrate, I think, some of the potential that there is to use robust science, data-informed, to help drive changes in this system. IESO is not unique in doing this. I think we're in a very good place. We've been innovative in the area, but I think the important point throughout this talk is when I'm talking about this provocation of 100 million minds, that's not something that I think we can do by ourselves. We need to be able to join up and do this together. So what's our starting point to thinking about how we can make us a meaningful change in mental health? Well, for us, I think a really important thing is to start with real world data. So that's sort of drawing a distinction from the kind of rarefied example of pure clinical trials to actually thinking about how is this working in the real world? How is this working for real people living real lives? And what we've done at IESO in a history that stretches back nearly 20 years is to think about allowing the delivery of psychological therapies in a more accessible way. So the starting point with that was to think about an online platform that would allow a therapist to communicate with somebody in need of help in their own home at a time that suited them. So the platform that we have developed and that we use for more or less all of the care that we deliver is a text exchange between a patient and a clinician. So very much like a WhatsApp conversation. And there will be an exchange between the patient and the clinician, and depending on the needs of the patient and the treatment journey, that can last between 5 and 10 sessions. On average, it's about just under 6 hours of therapy for each patient. And when we do that, when we engage in this conversation, we measure the outcomes using standardized measures at every point of contact with the patient. So we have a very detailed understanding of their journey through care towards recovery. And underpinning our system are a number of AI tools that I'll get into the details of. I think it's important to say that when this platform was launched, many people said that won't work. You need to have, for therapy to work, you need to be sat in the same room as somebody, you need to be able to see somebody. In our context, actually, we found that many people prefer the text-based format because it means they can do this in their own home, they can do this discreetly, so if other people are around in their environment, they won't hear the conversation. And actually the fact that they don't need to say things out loud and they don't need to see the person that they're working with for their therapy can actually be quite helpful in disclosing more and getting to the roots, deeper roots of the problem. The approach that we've taken, we ran a clinical trial for, and we got evidence for that in order that it would then get approved into the health system. But I have to say that even before I joined IESO, people were telling me that you couldn't do therapy this way. And I'd say, look, there's this company that's doing it. And people would say, no, it really doesn't work. Of course, when COVID hit, that was blown out of the water. I think we went from something like 7% of therapy being delivered online to over 90% of therapy being delivered online within a matter of months. So the issues that we were talking about as a company in terms of how you could use technology to improve mental health care met a lot of resistance. That's gone away. We're now in the stage of thinking about other issues where there may still be some resistance, and so we'll talk through some of those. Just to give you an idea of the data that we have accumulated through the process of treating nearly 100,000 people. So we have around 500,000 hours of therapy where we have the transcripts, access to the transcripts from that therapy, and an understanding of the interaction between the patient and the therapist. We treat a range of different conditions. The primary ones are depression and generalized anxiety disorder, although there are a number of other ones that I've listed on this slide. And as I mentioned, we routinely collect data from the participants about what they're experiencing using standardized metrics. The main ones that we use are the PHQ-9 and the GAD-7. These are very widely adopted, standardized open access tools. And we also use a number of specific measures for particular conditions. The important point is that we collect those data, we do that systematically, and we are able to report those in a transparent way so that anybody who wants to see performance in the service is able to do that. So having acquired this data, what do we then do with it? So we've then applied a number of pieces of rigorous analytics to it. In order to sort of think about this problem, I like to think about what's the general equation for medicine. That's really our starting point here. So the general equation for medicine looks something like this. You have a sick person, you give them an intervention, and that makes them well. So how do we understand that process? Well, in order to work out whether they're sick, we probably need some kind of measurement. So we'll typically make a measurement beforehand, then we'll give some kind of intervention, and maybe we'll make a measurement afterwards, but often the subsequent measurements are in different fields of medicine. Often those subsequent measurements aren't well described. And at the end of that process, we can come to a judgment about whether the intervention that we used was successful or unsuccessful. And if we have a rational system and we're using these data well, then of course we can feed back the outcome from that journey to different points of this to really understand, do we really understand what it is that we are measuring and the patient that we are treating at the beginning? Do we have any understanding of the intervention that we've used in order to drive that outcome? So this is a sort of generic form. It's worth saying that within the context of mental health and talking therapy in particular, it's been really hard to understand what the interventions are. If you're dependent on a conversation between two people and that conversation disappears as soon as the words are spoken, then how can we really understand what it was that happened for a patient that got them on their path to recovery? So the way in which we think about this is to say, at the start of treatment, we're going to make an assessment. We're going to gather data from the participant, from the patient, and there'll be certain demographic information about them, and there'll be certain things about the symptoms that they're experiencing when we make that assessment. During therapy, because we have this unique platform, we're able to capture the exchange between the therapist and the patient. Therefore, we can capture and quantify variables of therapy. And as I've said, because we systematically measure symptoms as we go, we have a record of how people transition through care. And then at the end of a course of treatment, we can again measure symptoms and we can measure outcome variables. So has the person made a meaningful recovery in their lives? And basically try to use all of that data to understand the complexities of mental health conditions, the complexities of mental health treatments. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of things that we've done by following this approach. And the first is to go back to this point I made at the beginning, that many different people will cluster under the same diagnostic label. So using this wealth of data, we've been able to come up with smart ways of using mathematical modeling, basically to disaggregate, to tease apart different subtypes of, in this case, depression. So we've been able to see depression subtypes which are robust and stable over time, and we can see the journeys of those people towards recovery that are quite different from one type of depression from another type of depression. Another thing we've been able to do is to think about how do we identify what's happening during therapy that actually drives people towards recovery. So we've built an AI-based analysis engine to look at the patient transcripts and find out what was it between the exchange between the therapist and the patient. So in very broad brushstrokes, we can do something like this, which is to, for the first time, really take a typical hour of therapy, which is very difficult to understand from the outside, certainly at scale, and then be able to break that down into different sort of functional units within the course of therapy to try and understand what it is that's being said, what and how what's said during that course of treatment relates to whether the patient then goes on to get better or not. I've got a little demo of this on the screen here, so hopefully you can see the video. What's happening here is we're seeing a mock exchange. I'm not showing you real exchange between a patient and a therapist, but you're seeing the therapist view here. And what's happening when the therapist types to answer back to the patient is the AI system is automatically identifying what is it that the therapist is trying to do here, putting some tags on that so that we have a way of understanding at the level of each kind of sentence or utterance, what was the therapist trying to achieve, what was the content of therapy, and then we can relate that to the final performance over at the end of this to work out what is it that's good about the therapy, what hasn't worked well about the therapy. So using this kind of modern AI techniques, in this case, this is a hierarchical deep learning model, we're really able to come up with ways of assisting the classical therapy process of a human being talking to a human patient. How do we use these insights to improve care? So a lot of that technology we can then leverage in order to come up with ways of assisting the therapy process. And one question that we ask ourselves is, if I'm looking at an individual patient in front of me, how do I know whether they're making good progress or not? As I've kind of sketched out, we can think about that process as what we measure before, what we measure during, and then what we measure afterwards. And one of the things that we've worked out is based on that pre-assessment, so before they start treatment, we can work out what do we expect in terms of the type of trajectory that that person will follow towards their recovery. So we can generate an individualized prediction for a given individual, and then we can compare how they're actually doing with that prediction. So here I'm showing you some kind of trajectory plots of a recovery through treatment. The green shaded area shows you the kind of bounds that we expect based on the assessment that we made of the patient at the beginning of that process, of the therapy process. And what we're looking at here are scores for depression, PHQ-9, and anxiety, GAD-7, where the lower the score, the less distress you're under. So the sort of the less you're experiencing mental health conditions. So we want those data to come down over the course of treatment over a different number of sessions. So this is one patient, and then I'm showing you a trajectory from another patient, where we can see that green shaded bound where we would want the patient to be, actually this particular individual is not falling within that. And it's important that we've got this individualized approach. So if I look, for instance, at the GAD-7 data, I see for the top patient, they have a GAD score of 16 in treatment number 3. And in the bottom patient, a GAD score of 16 for treatment number 6. Without this kind of individualized prediction, how would we work out whether a GAD score of 16 was okay, which it is for the first patient, but not okay, which is the case for the second patient? So we're able to get a reasonable understanding of the patient's journey, but we're also able at the level of the individual patient to try and understand what is it that's happening with the therapist. So as you saw in the demo just before, we have this way of tagging the content of the therapy session. We can produce that, we can put that into a dashboard, and we can see, okay, what is it, has the therapist been delivering all the key elements of therapy that need to be there based on our knowledge of the clinical science and the CBT protocols, the cognitive behavioral therapy protocols. So we can track that, in terms of what's being delivered for an individual patient across different therapy sessions. And I'm showing you the corresponding therapist evaluation for these two individual patients here. And basically in these plots, green means good, red means that the therapist is kind of missing out key bits of activity. So where we see the green activity, those elements of the therapy are being delivered, and where we see the red, those elements aren't being delivered. And in this case, we can see that for the second individual, clearly key parts of the therapy protocol are not being delivered through this. So these tools allow us to help clinical supervisors work with their therapist in order to highlight, okay, there are elements that we see that are missing. If you can boost those, if you can make those more effective, that's likely to do a better job for the patients and help the patient on the journey to recovery. So that's looking at an individual case, but also in working with therapists, we look across all of the patients that they treat. Because we make these predictions, we can do that on an individualized basis. So some cases are more complex than other cases. And so by working out the predictions for each individual patient, we can then see, do we expect this person to recover or not, for instance? And then we can compare for an individual therapist across all the patients that they have seen, whether they are in line with those predictions, doing better those predictions, or doing worse than those predictions. I'm presenting that in kind of quite a stark way. One of the realities actually through doing this is that we found that particular therapists have particular skills for treating particular conditions, and actually using these tools can help us allocate therapists according to the conditions that they're best at treating. We don't use this as a stick. What we try to use this as a means of providing feedback and supporting the continual professional development of the clinicians that work with us. I think, what are the outcomes of that? Well, those bits of technology I've sketched out have been important in this graph. They're not the only thing that is important here that's contributed to this. But we have, within the company, we have a sort of case-controlled benchmark cohort that we look at the performance of every year. And we've been looking at that over the since 2013 up to the most recent data from 2021. And what we've been able to see by systematically working to improve our service is that we can drive up recovery rates. So we've moved away from hovering around that kind of 50-50 mark to getting performance that's approaching 70% with the patients in this with the patients in this cohort. So, you know, we really believe that when you take a scientific approach, when you try to be really systematic about this, we can do the really important thing, which is to get more patients that we see through to recovery. That's all very well, you might say, but I've been talking basically about 100,000 people, and I've made the challenge of 100 million people. So how can we apply this thinking and these insights in order to get us to the bigger number of 100 million people? And I'll come back to this graph or this diagram with therapists across the therapist resource across the world, or mental health resource across the world. Because the reason I chose the number 100 million was when I sat down to sort of do the thinking and do the calculations on this, I worked out that if I was looking at populations in, let's say, North America, English-speaking parts of Europe, and Australia, then I wouldn't have a way of reaching that ambitious target of 100 million people within 5 years. So the purpose of that target was, in a sense, to make us think beyond the global north, as often described, and think about how we can think about the problem of gaining access across the globe in a way that is accessible and affordable to people. So that's really at the kind of heart of why I think we need to think about a really big number of people, because this isn't just about improving, for me, this is not just about improving mental health provision in the UK or even in the UK and North America. It's about saying, how can we use technology? How can we use AI in order to tackle a problem that is significant for the whole world and is massively under-resourced? So what would it really take to help 100 million people? So we need to think about access to care, and that care needs to be high quality. There's no use providing access to things that will not help. In fact, we've seen that when people take things that are not useful for them, it delays them, and that delay can actually make it harder for them to recover in the end. It has to be affordable across the globe. And so we're talking about solutions that are properly scalable across diverse populations. And it also has to be acceptable to diverse groups. I think this is one of the lessons really for me about the pandemic, and the amazing speed with which we developed a vaccine, were able to roll it out. And that last bit of how do you get the vaccine from the vial in the refrigerator into somebody's arm, we probably thought less about. But actually making sure that what we develop is going to work for people in different settings for diverse groups is a really important part of this challenge. And we will do well to remember that as we think about scalable solutions for mental health. So these are the kind of three things that I think we need to do. And then I'm just going to go through what I see as some of the challenges and opportunities with these different headings. So in terms of access to high quality care, well, I've shown you that we've got too few clinicians, that care quality is often variable, and that waiting lists are long. And as I've alluded to, when waiting lists are long, the chances of getting somebody to recover go down. What's our opportunity here? Well, I hope you've seen some evidence that we can use AI in smart ways to think about assistance at least, but we need to be grounded in real world evidence. And again, I think collecting data in the type of way that we do at IESO and more broadly within psychological services within the UK is a very good way of doing that. And if we are using computer-based solutions, then we have the opportunity to make those available on demand. So the days of it taking a long time for somebody to feel able to ask for care, and then when they get to the point of being asking for care, being told, okay, we'll see you in 6 months' time, should be long gone. When we have, if we can have technology do this, then our ambition is that you come in and you say you want care, and we can give you access to something the same day. Making it affordable across the globe. There has been, over the past 20, 50 years, systematic underinvestment in mental health. Clinicians are expensive, and treatments can run into thousands and thousands of dollars. Again, so I think if we're thinking about scalable technology-driven solutions, we can use those to lower the cost per patient. Alongside that, though, I think it's important to make the economic case for mental health, and I'll explore that a little bit in just a moment. And then thinking about what's acceptable to diverse groups. One of the things that's held mental health back has often been some very entrenched views about the way in which things should be done. So you take a pill, or you don't take a pill, you have a therapy. If you have a therapy, it has to be this particular type of therapy. We need to overcome that. We also have challenges, again, in thinking about the use of technology and how we ensure responsible data use and privacy. So I think one of the things we've been thinking about quite a lot is how we can engage lived experience, how we can have a meaningful conversation with people that we would like to be able to use technology-driven solutions, and how, when we're thinking about what we do and how we move forward, we can do that in a way that is responsible. So just to give you a few sort of vignettes, I think, about thinking of some of these things, these I'm not making a claim that we have a solution, but I think some of the potential is here that I'd just like to walk you through. So what I have for you here is a demo of an app that we have built to help supplement human-delivered care. So this is kind of an add-on to therapy. So this isn't designed to be a replacement, but this is saying, how can we move from the assistive technologies I've talked before, where we have an AI that's able to label things, to actually something that's delivering something. So here we have AI that's actually able to generate text, able to generate responses to a person that reflects back what they're hearing from the patient. In this case, it's not a patient, it's a demo, but it will respond to what the patient is saying in a way that shows understanding of what the patient is experiencing and able to relate that to other experiences of people. The important thing here is that we see this as a way of the patient gaining extra experience outside of a classical human-delivered therapy experience. And when we're doing this, by doing this in the form of dialogue, we're trying to make that more like a therapy experience rather than just being given a PDF or a textbook to go away and read. And when we've used this, we found that we can get good engagement from people who've tried this out. So we think it's really promising that we can start using AI-driven conversational agents to have that conversation about mental health functioning. In the medium term, we are looking to autonomous care. We think that's realistic for specific groups of patients. So we don't think this is going to work for everybody, but in the medium term, I think it's within our reach to get to a point where we can have meaningful clinical impact driven through autonomous AI tools. I mentioned the economics of healthcare, and I'll just give you another kind of vignette on that to think about the economic value of good mental health. This is some analysis that we've been doing in partnership with a large NHS trust in the UK. And we've been looking at the healthcare costs incurred by individuals within the health system as they receive mental health treatment. And what I'm showing you in this graph here is the cost of one episode of care for depression. And the stacked bar graphs represent at the bottom what's the cost of the treatment itself. And then the lighter green bars on top show you the cost of the costs that are incurred by that patient from their use of other medical services. So, for instance, visiting the GP, visiting the emergency room. And what we see here is that as the severity of depression goes up, so we're looking across different patients, then there is a slight increase in the treatment costs, but a bigger increase in the background costs. So people who have more severe mental health conditions are causing more draw on the health service resources. The other thing that we've looked at within this analysis is what is the cost of delaying treatment. I mentioned before that we've seen in our data that the longer somebody has to wait, the harder they are to treat. What this graph is capturing is a combination of the background costs that you saw in the previous graph and the cost in terms of the quality of life that is reduced for a person who is suffering with a mental health condition. So it affecting, so a measurement of the quality of life adjusted years. And what we can see in this graph very clearly is that those quality costs, so how much less productive you are, increase very quickly with increasing delay for access to mental health care services. I've illustrated this for moderate depression. This is even more, this is even stronger if we look at the data from severe depression. So what this tells us, I think, is that the significant costs of mental health conditions don't come from treating them. They come from not treating them. And if we think across our societies, if we think across the organizations that we work in, the teams that we work in, we know that one of our colleagues, one of our friends suffering from a mental health condition, it doesn't just affect them. It affects the rest of their team. It affects their productivity in the workplace and their ability to function. These are big costs, and we need to start factoring this into our thinking about how we tackle mental health and how much we're prepared to invest in mental health. And finally, I'll touch on this issue about lived experience and responsible innovation. So for us, involving experts by experience is essential in shaping the future of high quality mental health care. We don't think it's realistic to develop new technologically driven solutions if we're not involving the people who would be directly affected by those. When we do that, we think solutions will be more robust and they'll be more likely to have impact. Again, to draw on that analogy, how do we ensure that we've developed a successful COVID vaccine, that people are willing to take that vaccine into their arm? And the way in which we're thinking about lived experience is that the experts that we've been engaging with are advisors. They're not participants. So it's not that we're doing studies on these people. It's not that we're focus grouping with these people. Actually, we have invited them into the company to recognize their expertise and say, we would like you to shape not what we do, but how we do it. What are the principles under which we develop, we take forward our research and development agenda? And just to give you a quick flavor of some of the principles that have come out from that, I think are really useful for us in sort of guiding our thinking as we go forward. But some of the sort of key things we've worked on together with our experts by experience are thinking about ensuring that treatments are evidenced, effective and personalized, making sure that whatever the treatment approach is, it's collaborative and that the patient feels empowered within that journey, making sure that the tools that are offered are timely, accessible and sustainable. And the tools need to be engaging, but responsibly so. So we want them to be compelling, but what we don't want to do is create a dependency on a tool. Our ambition for our tools is that they will help people live their lives, not become regular users of the technology, but actually to use that for a short period in order that they can go out and lead flourishing lives. The tools need to be equitable, inclusive, and meet different groups, different needs across communities, conditions, and contexts. And when we're using patient data, we need to be really clear and transparent about that and ensure that there's a strong focus on patient benefit in the use of those data. So this is work in progress for us. It's a conversation that we've started. We don't think we've reached the end of that journey, and actually working with lived experience advisors as we travel forward is really critical as we're trying to develop these technologies and take them forward. So I'll end just with a kind of challenge really for the audience to ask you how you can help think about meeting the challenge of mental health. There are a number of things that we can all do and we can all pick up. And I hope this talk has given you some food for thought that might encourage you to do that. It's clear to me that we need to invest in mental health solutions, especially in acting earlier and in thinking about how we maintain good mental health. That's just not incentivized within current systems. I said this earlier, access is really important. But when we're talking about access, it's not just give somebody something, it's give somebody something that's high quality care. That's the thing that really matters. We've seen within IESO and within the IAPT service in the UK more generally, that by focusing on patient outcomes, using evidence-based treatments, we can really drive things forward. We can drive forward research, we can make advances in understanding how we treat people and how we get conditions better. And the way in which it's set up within the UK is that all of that reporting is open and transparent. The metrics that we use are available for all mental health providers in that service within the UK, not just IESO, across all services. So if anybody's looking for a good model, I would highly recommend taking a look at the IAP model in England's National Health Service. We think it's a kind of a wonder of the modern world from where we sit. It's also, I think, important to say people should be incentivized based on results. By doing that, we move away from this being rewarded for providing something to being rewarded for providing something good. That will drive up quality and increase value for health systems and societies. Scientists and academics in the audience, mental health is a really hard challenge, and it's been, I think, it's been somewhat neglected over a period of many years. And there are some brilliant people who work in it, but there's definitely room for many, many more. Where we sit now, I think we now have the data and the insights to really make significant breakthroughs in mental health. I hope that in 5-10 years' time, we won't be talking about depression anymore. We'll be really thinking about the specific subtypes. We'll be thinking about ways to identify those reliably. That effort isn't just about psychologists or data scientists. It needs an interdisciplinary coalition of researchers to do that. I hope that may encourage some people to think about it. And I'll just end on this point about experts by experience. So I think it's vital that people with lived experience of mental health conditions are contributing to the debate about the future of digital products to meet the challenge of mental health. When organizations bring them in, or when lived experience experts are going into organizations, they should be recognized as experts in the same way that any other expert is recognized. So, when we have a lived experience person coming to us as a contractor, we're thinking about them as a contractor in the same way as somebody who might be helping us with our IT systems or helping us with accountancy. They are experts, and we need to recognize that. And again, I think experts by experience can really help us come up with innovative new solutions that are focused on the benefits for people who are experiencing poor mental health. So lots of thanks to give. I feel really fortunate to work with an amazing team at IESO. I feel really fortunate that the investors that have supported us have seen the value of science. We worked out recently, I think we have about 15% of the company within our science team really focused on trying to use these data in order to come up with the best solutions possible for mental health. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was fantastic. And it's such an important topic. I think, yeah, you can't appreciate enough how important of a topic you're addressing. And after your talk, I was just impressed by every new slide and data point information you provided. But I was left, I don't have any critical questions to ask anymore. But that's not true. I have a couple of good questions lined up, and I want to start by giving the audience the opportunity. So let's start with the questions with where it all begins. So Mintrin is asking, what's the legal framework for such tools?
For using AI tools, it's very complicated. So we're in some, depending on what the tools do, they may be medical devices. If they're medical devices, then they need to be regulated. So depending on the geography, there are different contexts for that. There are different rules on that. So I suppose within Europe, we think about kind of CE mark. Within the US, then we think about recognition by the FDA. So there are processes to go through in order to get those devices recognized. But again, it depends on exactly what's in the tool, exactly how it works, as to whether that is or is not a medical device.
Okay. Then going on in the pathway to care process, Sylvia from Mexico City is asking, how do you obtain, or do you see any challenge in obtaining informed consent from patients who will need to consent to, using the transcript for downstream analyses?
Yeah.
And do you see any challenge in obtaining consent for something very complicated, having Markov models, AI, natural language processing models on their therapy session applied?
Yeah, so I guess it goes without saying that we have a very rigorous framework in place for doing all of that. I suppose our perspective on that is how do we ensure that we are being transparent and open about the ways in which we're using those data, and what's the purpose of using those data. A person coming through into our service now is the service they receive now has benefited from all of the work that's gone before on all of the previous individuals who consented to allow their data to be used for research purposes. But I think one of the things that we've discussed internally is, is there any time at which we would be happy to let somebody think they were talking to a patient, to a human therapist when they were talking to an AI? And the very simple answer to that is no. So we want to make sure that we're being completely transparent with people in terms of saying, at some points in your patient journey, you may be speaking to a therapist, a human therapist. At other points, you'll be talking to an AI, and you will always know who's at the end of the line with you, because we're not trying to hide anything with this technology. These are complicated technologies. We're working very hard to make sure that they are safe and effective, and in a way that we saw at the start of IESO's journey that people didn't believe that you could do therapy through text online where you couldn't see other people. When we've got the evidence for that and we can show that this works convincingly, I think people will come along with it, but it will take time. And again, I think for us, that's why thinking about the lived experience piece, bringing in those experts, inviting that challenge is, and again, that it's, the sort of the notion of experts by experience being equals around the table with us is really critical, because when we've worked with them, we've started off by saying, look, you are here to challenge us. We want this to be a constructive conversation, but we need you to share with us your expertise on these issues and tell us the things that you don't feel comfortable with. So I guess for us, it's really about transparency and being as transparent and open as possible.
Okay. And have you had feedback from the clinicians and therapists as to if they enjoy administering therapy in a chat environment versus sitting in a room with a patient and interacting human to human?
I think they're different. So many of the therapists that we work with do both of those things. So much of the therapy that's delivered by IESO it tends to be delivered in the evening, because that's a time that works for many people. They don't have to take time off work, etc. And many of the therapists we work for also have kind of day jobs, as it were, where they're doing more traditional kind of face-to-face therapy. And so it's a combination of those two that most of our therapists, or many of our therapists, experience. And I think they see sort of they see some of the kind of benefits of being able to do this in the text-based format. So I guess it's been part of our working model for such a long time that it's not really a question for us anymore, but it is something that broadly the excellent therapists we work with understand when they come into the business, and certainly they deliver excellent therapy that way.
Okay. And I wonder, so in a traditional face-to-face therapy session, if the therapist senses that the patient is in danger because of a more serious disease like a psychosis,
yeah.
How does that work at IESO's platform, and also when there is potentially pharmaceutical treatment involved, where side effects need to be monitored and so forth? How do you integrate all of that?
So I guess all of our clinicians are expert in dealing with identifying signs of risks and then probing where there are signs of risk, then being able to escalate that in a smooth and standardized way. That's all done through human-delivered risk assessment at this point. The second question was
in terms of a treatment, if there's
combination. Yeah, for me, that's an amazing opportunity if we could really learn from those. So we as a company provide psychological therapy. So if somebody is also in receipt of medication, that's something that's not done through us. But I would love us to get to a place where we could think about how we might think about not therapy versus pharmaceutical, but actually how a little bit of pharmaceutical might help you get ready for a psychological therapy journey that then hands off into something that's more socially structured to help you maintain your recovery in the longer term. For me, that would be a really exciting development, but we're not there yet. So I guess the short answer is, that sits outside of us, but I think there's tremendous opportunity to learn from that.
Okay. So we're at the hour, but I'd like to close with a question by Fred. He's asking, who is defining the good in good mental health? Nice question to close our discussion on.
Yeah. Again, I think that comes back to this sort of linguistic continuum that we had at the beginning there, and recognizing the variety of human experience. I guess the way I think about this is, what we're talking about is how we minimize distress and how we minimize the times when people just are not able to function as they would like to function because of the distress that they are experiencing. That varies between different people. Getting an understanding of that is a really hard thing. I wish we were better at it, but it remains a core part of the challenge.
Okay, great, Andrew. Many thanks. This was so impressive. I think nobody doubts that mental health is kind of the dooming, huge, epidemic that is now increasingly being recognized. Also by, we were just working in the focus group on a grant to the Botner Foundation, and one of their focuses as well is mental health among the young. And as we were talking, I thought at first I would never want to talk to an AI bot. I have bad experiences when chatting, with, customer, service AI bots. But I think especially if it's in combination with a therapist and exercises like adding thoughts to the diagram, like in your presentations, I think, these guided exercises, I would totally do it, and it gives so many more people access, and it's just a really wonderful and impressive example of how to improve mental health care. And I think it is the future. And you've really, really done a really good job at presenting all of this. So on behalf of the audience and on behalf of AI for Good, thanks a lot for being with us today. Andrew and I will be in the neural network 30 seconds from now, and we'll answer and discuss any more questions you might have. And with no further ado, I'd say thank you, have a good rest of the day, and see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you for participating in today's AI for Good session. We hope you've learned something new, innovative, and engaging in today's event. We now encourage you to continue the conversation on the live video wall in the neural network. Here you can ask questions, like and comment, share links, complete the satisfaction survey, connect with interesting profiles, or speak one-on-one using the chat and video function. After the 30-minute networking session, we invite you to explore the lobby, try the smart matching quiz, visit the virtual exhibits and poster boards, and build your personalized AI for Good program. It was a pleasure learning with you today. See you at the next AI for Good.